Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome
Good
to
evening.
June. Welcome to AC Connect. We haven't seen each other in a couple of months, but we're happy to be here with another wonderful guest speaker to share a little bit about, again, our Alberta context. Last time we talked about sort of the affordability in Alberta, and this time we're going to talk about wages in Alberta. So before we turn the floor over to Miranda, our presenter for this evening, I just want to acknowledge where we are. And we're coming from all across the province. So if you could all acknowledge for yourselves, we don't have sort of a communal chat on this platform, but for yourselves, acknowledge the territory you're coming from. And I'll just acknowledge that the AECE office is located on Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homeland and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. And we really acknowledge that this land is the traditional territories of many First Nations groups, such as the Nehiyah Cree, the Denusilene, the Dene, the Nakota Sioux, the Stoney, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, and Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot. And, oh, there we go. I put it in there 4 times in my slide, so I apologize. I forgot that Laura was like, oh yeah, I put it there lots. I was like, wow, it's a really long land acknowledgement. No, Leah, you just copied it 4 times. That's how we go.
It was excellent.
What this does in our practice really is to remind us that this tradition of honoring the land and recognizing the land really spans generations and helps us to build those respectful relationships and acknowledge that land is a really important part of our reconciliation journey as Canadians. So just a few reminders, since we haven't been here for a while, and some of you may not have been to one of these sessions before. We really prioritize that connection in our AC Connect. So we're here in a safe space, prioritizing respectful feedback and connection, and really recognizing that this is a community of peers. We're all in practice in ECE in some form across the province. None of us are coming with answers or mandates. We're coming with the desire to share information. We will be recording the session because we make it available on ACE's website afterwards. So if there's people you know who've missed it, or if you want to go back and revisit it, or you want to share it with someone else, it will be up in the next week or so on the ACE website. There is a questions box in the bottom of your little information panel. I forget what it's called, the little dashboard panel. There we go. So you can put questions into the question box. I don't know how much time we're going to have for the back and forth questions tonight, but we do keep the questions after the session is over. And so we do try and Laura works really hard to look through those questions to get information out to people or to just share things through the AC website. So don't be afraid to put your questions in there, even if we don't have time to address them this evening. All right, and without further ado, I will introduce Miranda. And Miranda's coming to us from York University, where she's a master's student, and she's also a research assistant at the Community University Partnership in the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. So if you were here last month, you might remember Rob, who also came from that Community University Partnership. So obviously they're a really excellent partner for gathering and sharing information about what our ECE landscape is in Alberta. So Miranda spent the last year working really closely with the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care with Rob on policy research in the early learning and care sector. So she's going to share with us some of that research specific to wages in Alberta and what do wages mean for retention in a labor market as unique as Alberta's, and what does Alberta's current retention philosophy communicate about how the province values ECEs and care work in general in our province. So I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it over to Miranda.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Okay. So good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here this evening. I appreciate it. So as mentioned, my name is Miranda. I had a little thing prepared, but now I don't have to introduce myself. But I will introduce the Edmonton Council for Early Learning and Care. So they build on existing capacities and provide leadership in managing, planning, and supporting the development of a system of high quality early learning and care services in Edmonton. So tonight I'm going to be talking specifically about early childhood educator wages in Alberta. And portions of this presentation have already been given by Rob to childcare in Alberta. So just a quick overview of my presentation, just so everyone knows what to expect. So first, I will be having a background on what prompted me to begin to research the claim that ECEs in Alberta were the highest paid in Canada. Next, I'll be discussing the historical wage data from Stats Canada used to perform my analysis, and then accompanied by what I phrased as the good news prior to taking a step back and contextualizing the bigger picture, and then discussing this data in comparison to 2021 living wage data from Alberta. So finally, in terms of presentation content, I will be briefly touching on what comes next for improving retention in the sector and some gender-based analysis considerations of the wage data. So the presentation will conclude with some discussion questions that I would like to pose, and with hopefully the opportunity for further focus group discussions with educators later in the summer, performed by some of my colleagues. So thank you. Next slide, please. So despite, just the back one sec, yeah, sorry. So despite the increased attention being paid to early childhood educators, workers in the field continue to be underpaid and many do not make a living wage. Earlier this year, then Minister of Children's Services maintained that wage top-ups in Alberta constituted the highest in the country, and there were no foreseeable plans to increase wage top-ups or to use the federal funds to increase wages for early childhood educators. So this presentation hopes to demystify that comment by unpacking what wages actually look like for ECEs in Alberta by examining how base wages and top-ups have changed since 2000. So basically, the first section of this presentation, we'll be going over what ECEs in Alberta have earned from 2000 to 2020. So next slide, please. Okay, so just a little housekeeping quickly to explain how these numbers appeared like this. So this is change in average hourly wage for childcare workers from 2000 to 2020, and then adjusted for inflation and compared to all other occupational groups put together. So to be noted here, childcare worker is not the same as early childhood educator. So these numbers include the national occupational classification codes of early childhood educators and assistants, while also including home care child providers, ECEs working with children up to age 12, workers in unlicensed situations, and for supervisors as well. So this was unfortunately the only data available to be able to look up sub-Alberta geographies. So by comparing 2000 and 2020, wages for childcare workers and all other occupations in 2020 constant dollars, we see that the percentage increase for childcare workers has been significantly higher, ranging between 23% and 14% higher overall. So the wage increase has been at the highest in Calgary with a rate of 54%. While the lowest wage increase was for Canada as a whole at a rate of 39%. So in comparison, the wage percentage increase for all other occupations over the last 2 decades has been between 36 and 25%. So this is the good news-ish. So this suggests that wages over the last 20 years for childcare workers have been increasing at a higher level than other occupations. To be noted though, given the wage discrepancy between childcare workers and all other occupations, The percentage increase is not entirely surprising, but it does suggest that the necessity of childcare workers is beginning to be realized and reflected in larger wage increases than in other occupational groups. However, the wage gap between childcare workers and other occupations is still consequential. Next slide, please. So on the other hand, the provincial data, so again, a little housekeeping. This is looking at the average total hourly wages for certified Alberta childhood educators working in specifically licensed programs. And this data includes September 2019 to January 2020, including wage top-ups, but unadjusted for inflation. So while considering inflation in Alberta from 2019 to 2021 was an average 4.3%, and provincial top-ups haven't changed since 2018. So all of this increase from 2019 to 2020 is due to employers raising wages, not from the provincial top-ups. So also to be noted, we only have 3 publicly available data points, so as the ones that are on the screen. And in January 2022, too many twos in that sentence. This includes ECEs working in preschools, whereas the previous 2 data points did not include that because ECEs in preschools did not receive the wage top-up until July 2021. So another interesting data point to consider is from the Early Childhood Education Report produced by the Atkinson Centre for Society and Child Development at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. So since 2011, early childhood educators in Alberta have gone further away from reaching the 50% mark of teachers' salaries. Notably, this is not just less than 50%. This suggests that early childhood educators actually earn around 39 to 48% of a teacher's salary. So the closest was 48% in 2011, with the most substantial increase to 2014 to 39%, followed by a jump back in 27 to 46% or 47%, only to decrease to 45% in 2020, which was under 2017 levels. All in all, this suggests ECEs in Alberta are being valued at approximately half of what teachers are being valued at if we are using wage as a proxy for value. So this is the bad news. Next slide, please. So the wage gap between ECE workers and other occupations in Alberta matters for a number of reasons. First, because it's easy to look at absolute wages of ECEs in Alberta and claim that they have the highest wages in the country. But this doesn't tell the entire story or take into account that relative to other occupations in Alberta, ECE workers are paid among the least. This means that the wage gap between ECEs in Alberta and other occupations is the highest, while being the lowest in provinces like Quebec. This matters because it says something about the relative value of early childhood educators in Alberta compared to all other workers. However, this gap could be somewhat exaggerated due to Alberta's oil and gas industry, which distorts wages by raising the average wage in some regions above the equilibrium wage for comparable occupations and other geographic regions. Although to be noted, this dynamic can also have an impact on the price of goods and services, thereby actually increasing the cost of living in that region. So this is particularly impactful for regions like Calgary and Fort McMurray. So additionally, the Northern Allowance Program ended in July 2020, which for some early childhood educators in Northern Alberta resulted in a pay cut of approximately $12,480 annually. The loss of the Northern Allowance Program would have been particularly impactful to Fort McMurray, where the living wage is among the highest in Alberta at $27.35 per hour. So next page, please. So next slide, please. So the living wage is a methodological tool used to calculate a living wage by considering the cost of living, the inflation rate, and the cost of a commodity basket in a particular region to determine how an hourly wage would enable a living wage. However, living wages are usually calculated based on full-time hours. So that's 40 hours based on a 50 weeks per year. So this is important to note because ECEs don't tend to work full-time, and some may work seasonally. So hourly wages can be a deceptive measure. So ECE hours can also be part-time and include split shifts, which can significantly lower the annual income earned by ECEs, which in turn may result in the appearance of a living wage while workers are still earning working poverty annual incomes, especially if they live in a region where the cost of living is above the average and they're not actually working full-time hours all year round. So this slide represents childcare worker wages versus the living wage in Calgary, Edmonton, and Lethbridge. So this is average hourly wages for childcare workers compared to the living wage in 2021. So notable is this is using data from Statistics Canada, as there's no actual data from the province available for ECE wages in cities in Alberta. So we don't have any other data other than for these cities, and then this was actually a special order to get this from Statistics Canada. So it's possible that childcare worker wages went up in these 3 cities in 2021, as these figures may be out of date. And finally, this comparison is using the 2021 living wage calculations from Alberta Living Wage Network. So here we have ECE wages versus the living wage. And assuming ECEs are making the average from provincial statistics and in everywhere in Alberta, we can immediately see here that most level 1s are not making a living wage throughout Alberta. Slide. Okay, so other things to consider. Gender-based analysis and maybe a new retention philosophy. So a gender-based analysis framework asks us to probe some of these findings further to consider the historical and intersectional variables at play when examining wages in the early learning and childcare sector. So who are the people we're talking about here? So they're you. They're all of you in the audience. And so what does it mean when you're being undervalued to this extent? And what does this mean for things like staff retention, especially as the federal and provincial government continue to prioritize affordability through demand-side subsidies by funding $10 a day childcare programs? So the first thing to consider is the gendered aspect of the childcare sector. So roughly 96% of early childhood educators and assistants are females, and they tend to be younger than the average Canadian worker. So data from the 2019 labor force survey suggests that 33% of childcare workers are immigrant-born or non-permanent residents, compared to 25% in all other occupational sectors. So these figures together highlight concerns about equity and the systemic undervaluing of care work. Care work is not only underpaid vis-a-vis wages, women are also more likely to face significant time restrictions because of unpaid care work. Some economists refer to this as time poverty, or the systemic undervaluing of women's contribution to the labor market. Regardless of how it's conceptualized, it suggests that this built-in undervaluing places women in a double bind, where they have less time because of more unpaid care work and earn less relative to their male counterparts due to the systemic undervaluing of female-dominated professions, including early childhood educators. Next slide, please. So as COVID-19 indicated, the childcare sector is crucial to keeping society functioning, and the retention of high-quality staff is a significant concern for the realization of an integrated system of early learning and childcare. Furthermore, it also appears that professional development subsidies for seemingly low staff retention levels among level 1s and level 2 ECEs in Alberta Evidence of staff shortages and retention issues in Alberta can be reflected in the ratio of childcare workers to total population. So for example, Quebec has the highest ratio of childcare workers to total working population, while Alberta has among the lowest, with childcare workers representing only 1.3 of the total working population. Next slide, please. So what comes next? Oh, sorry, and yeah, just stay at this one for 1 sec, please. So what comes next? So what can be done to address the wage gap for early childhood educators in Alberta? First, although briefly touched on above, there should be a more comprehensive examination of wages in Alberta to gauge what is actually going on in the sector. The roadmap to a quality early learning and childcare system in Alberta suggests that a salary scale could help address the significant wage gap outlined above. British Columbia has introduced a competitive and publicly funded provincial wage grid for the ECE sector. This could also be a viable solution for Alberta to consider when addressing both the wage gap and the staff retention issues currently present in the sector. Finally, as demand for space creation increases, with some estimates at 42,500 in the next few years, as outlined by the bilateral target of the recently released provincial federal childcare agreement, Alberta must focus on retention rates. So essentially, we need to make sure we have to keep who we have in the sector and also draw people to the profession. Without increasing wages, we risk continuing the problems we've had for a while, which seems to be high turnover and problems finding staff. So next slide, please. So wage grid could be something to consider. So basically, a wage grid is a value statement using dollars. So some things, values that might be reflected in a wage grid. Experience, so level of pre-service education, such as diplomas, degrees, continuing education, but although as Rob noted, more often continuing education seems to be a requirement to keep certification rather than something to be accounted for in a wage grid as a competency. So other things would include with supervisory responsibilities, specific local adjustments, and wages and salaries and benefits of other comparable jobs. Next slide, please. So just some questions more questions I'd like to pose to the audience. And these questions, I guess why we're posing these questions and hope that we can use these to better inform focus group questions with educators later in the summer to just better understand some of your concerns about what's going on in the sector right now. So the first question is, are there any factors not mentioned that you believe contribute to retention issues in the sector? So basically what we're asking is, what is the data missing? What is it not telling us? Is there anything in your personal experiences or that you've observed that was not mentioned that may be having an impact? So the next question is, what specific incentives should be included in a wage grid if Alberta decided to take that direction? So that would be including things like the opportunity to have a pension or to have very specific benefits that are not currently available. And the last question is, what kind of research or analysis on early childhood educator wages or policy options for increasing pay do you think would be useful? And yeah, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and any audience questions I will be able to take now.
Miranda, do you want any feedback on these questions right now?
Yeah, if we have time for that.
I think we probably do. So if anyone has any specific feedback to what Miranda's asking, we would love to hear from you. So thinking about what she's talked about and the questions that are on the screen around what information is missing. So Miranda mentioned lots of times that it was really hard to get data. And so what that tells me anyway is that there isn't very much out there. And someone had mentioned in the questions that, you know, Children's Services collects some of this data, but we don't actually have access to that. It's not just out there for people to have. So that might be another source where we're missing it. But are there other places that you can see that people could get this information? Thinking about wage grids, what would you want to see included in that? And then other things that might be useful. What other information do we need about this stuff? So you can put your comments into the question box and we can read them out, or you can use the hand up function, which again is in your little dashboard area. And Laura can unmute you. You'll probably have to also unmute yourself on your end if you want to kind of add some thoughts to these discussion questions specifically.
Okay, we've got a few areas to look at. I have Doug McDonald is asking what percentage of ECE workers have health benefits. That would be good to know, I think.
That is something that I'm unsure of at this moment. My apologies, Doug. That'd be a good thing to look into, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good question to add to the mix.
Same thing, kind of along the same thread. Sonia Sharma is saying pension plan is a very important thing for retention. Laura Parkinson saying benefits should be included as an added benefit, added monetary amount, as a lot of time teachers don't think about added benefits, tuition, discounts, health, pension, etc. There's somebody saying why we don't send letters to all ECEs to find correct data. With that one,
very large ask.
yeah, with that one, it comes down to privacy constraints. Because government can't share everybody's contact information and details, unfortunately. Like from AECE side, we can only communicate with those who have given us permission to communicate with them.
So Evangeline, your question in the box is, does the wage grid include the length in the field? And it doesn't. It is strictly based on that education and qualification piece. So it does, our current wage grade does not account for years of experience. So that might be something to consider if we did have a wage grid, adding that aspect of years of experience.
Ashton, sorry if I mispronounce this, Bjornson says, I feel like having unpaid field placements in a university setting does not contribute to professionalizing our field. It's a turnoff for young educators who wish to pursue the field. Having paid field placements would truly validate the worth of educators as they are beginning their journey.
That's a very interesting comment. I'd be curious to hear too, and maybe Miranda knows a bit about that around other occupations and their paid practicums or not paid practicums. That'd be an interesting comparison for sure.
I unfortunately don't know anything about that. It would be very interesting, and that's actually something I'm just learning is regularly occurring in the field. So thank you so much for your good feedback, and that would be definitely interesting, especially if that's contributing to some retention issues as well.
And Sonia, your comment about level ones getting support to improve, it really depends, I guess, what perspective you're coming from. I mean, Children's Services would say that there's the professional development grant and there's the, oh my gosh, I never remember what it's called, the time
release grant.
Thank you, time release. I'm like, I know there's an R. Yeah, the time release grant. So they would say that that's already happening, but it would be interesting to know how effective that is, how or has been over the, I don't know if it's even been quite a year since that's been in place, in encouraging people to do that improvement. And then you made another comment, like your experience in terms of upgrading, and that kind of ties back into that other comment about the fact that our wage grid does not account for levels of experience. So there's no way other than getting to a certain educational level to increase that wage top up that you're getting. So we can kind of see how all these things sort of layer together for sure.
And I think Miranda touched a little bit on that too, a continuing education, what that would look like. Is it a perception from the field? Is it an expectation to that commitment of professionalism? Or yeah, do we need that support to move forward like we do, right? So good consideration.
Yeah. And more comments around pension, RSPs, vacation, sick leave, all those things that many other industries would consider really basic rights as an employee, like sick leave and vacation. They're certainly not guaranteed in our field for many people.
So I have someone with their hand up, Eileen Cruz. You have been unmuted.
Yes. Yeah, so I have a question. I have a degree and I have an extensive experience working in other field. I work in accounting. The only problem working with me working in the computer is because of my eyes. So I decided to work with putting up a day home. So having my education, my degree with other field, why is not getting considered to be a level 3 when I have more experience, supervisory, managerial, to ECE? I only have level 1.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of ways to think about that, Aileen, and it's not, I mean, it exposes some of the ways that our current system isn't working, but it also, what it speaks to, and I think what ACE sort of advocates for as well, is the requirement for field-specific early learning and childcare education as being a base requirement for getting a qualification in the field. So thinking about that, all of this other knowledge and education that we bring to this field is valuable, but it doesn't replace that really foundational knowledge about early learning and that care, play, and learning that happens in the early years. And so, I mean, there's lots of ways to think about that and to consider what a variety of people bring to the field, because I mean, Michelle's making a comment in the questions here too, that ECE doesn't run without administrative people, and that is just the truth. And people with management and business experience bring a lot to the field, because those are aspects that are still a part of what we do, but are not often sort of a part of that foundational ECE knowledge. So yeah, that doesn't really answer your question, and that we're not here about answers necessarily, just kind of sharing those questions with one another. But I think those considerations could go into something like a more sophisticated wage grid, where we do consider what are all of the roles that make early learning and childcare successful, and how do we compensate people with those various skills who can add things to the field, who are necessary parts of the work that's happening, in addition to being really mindful of having frontline people all possessing a really foundational knowledge of early learning in order to get that qualification.
Okay. How about we have continuing education? Would that fill in the knowledge?
I don't have full answers to that, Eileen. Okay. I mean, none of us are from the government. You can look online at what qualifies you to get those things, what courses you might need to take, where that education fits in, whether or not, and I don't know whether continuing education credits count or whether it's only like university credit courses or college. So those are things that Children's Services could answer, because they're the ones who administer that money.
Okay.
Have to figure out where to get
all right. So what AECE does? Sorry, this is I just saw you on Facebook, and this is the first time I join you.
Yeah, AC well, Christy, go for it. Christy is on the board for AC, so she will have a lovely answer to that.
Yes, Aileen, and I'd love to touch base with you. Do you want to put in your email address in the chat, and we can touch base, your email address and your phone number, and I'll reach out to you tomorrow. We can talk a bit about what AECE does for sure. Yeah.
All right,
and,
sure.
That's a good plug for membership as well. I mean, to keep in the know, to be one of the first people to hear what AECE does.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll touch base for sure.
Right.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, if the chat is only seen by organizers, so nobody's putting their email and phone number out to everyone. It goes to us as organizers, so there'd be a limited 3 of us can see that. So.
Let's see here. Another person with their hand up. Eleanor, apologies if I mispronounced this. Chiam.
Hello.
Hi.
Good. I have a question about the wage top-up. Is that the government of Alberta planning to raise any wage top-up for childcare worker? And if no, why they just encourage us to go and get the level at the degree that they are calling level 4? Because it doesn't make any sense if you're gonna go spend money to come back and get $15 an hour or $6 for the top up.
Alberta currently doesn't have a level 4. We only are.
Yeah, but they have a degree. They have a degree in childcare, right?
You get a degree, but there is no level 4. There are degree grant programs in Alberta, so you can get a degree in child studies through Grant MacEwan or through Mount Royal College, but the government's wage top-up program only goes to level 3. There's no level 4.
Okay.
And so Martina actually also asked that question in the question box here, will the new wage grid, and that's something we're asking government about, because currently they've said they don't plan on making any changes to our wage top-ups. However, we know that these programs are out there, that many people come to this field with more than 2 years of education, and so what might that look like? So it's certainly a question, and around Miranda's second question on the slide here, what specific incentives should be included in a wage grid? And that might be one of them, is recognition for people with a degree in the field.
I'd like to just share Jen's comment. She said, great job, Amanda. That was an excellent presentation. I wonder if you can speak to the role that a wage grid can play, not only in retention, but also in attracting ECEs to the sector, in incentivizing ECEs to increase their level and in encouraging professional development. That's very interesting. In the retention piece and probably a bit of the recruitment.
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you. So I think the real, added value of a wage grid is it encourages, number one, it encourages retention because you have to have experience to advance, but it encourages competency, it encourages professional development growth, it encourages but I think even more from that, from like a young, more of like a personal perspective, I think when you're coming, actually, I have a really good friend, Esther. She did an early childhood diploma when we were quite young. Now she's still working in the sector. But I think when it came down for it, she loved her job, but there was just not a lot of job security, and that's what that was what was so hard, I think, is because she went to work every day. She loved what she did. She loved seeing the kids. She loved interacting with parents. She loved the environment. But what was, I think, what in her back of her mind, why she kind of was trying to pivot into something more like sports therapy is because it had more of a sense of security, and it had more of a sense of they valued her as an individual and there was room to grow. And so I think that's when we kind of were talking a little bit more about considering like a change in the philosophy around seeing it. I think it seems Alberta is really notorious, I think, for having, like, we all have experience if you went to high school there with the RAP program. They really, really encourage high school students into very specific sectors, but maybe not put in the supports and what I'm really interested in is the comment about placement, about unpaid field placement, because that was really kind of some lights going off. But they encourage young people almost into the sector based on their benevolence and like how their innate ability to be caregivers, but then they don't put in the actual structural supports to ensure that they stay in the sector and that they feel valued and want to succeed in the sector. And so I think sorry, I kind of went on a rant, but I think what's very interesting about a wage grid is it also it provides both like a sense of security in the sense that you can grow, you can develop skills, you can have skill transferability into like management positions or other supervisory positions, while also there's an individual component where you are evaluated based on like what you're willing to put into it. So I think well, fingers crossed that Alberta chooses to go that direction, but I think it would be a really kind of interesting way to try and sneak in some of those value added things that were mentioned, even that teachers kind of don't necessarily consider, like vacation pay and dental and all that fun stuff. So thank you so much for the question.
Miranda, I think Nikki DeBlanco might be having trouble finding her hand, but she did say she may have a comment there. Nikki, if you still want to comment.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
I've never been on this end before, but anyways, I was just somebody had asked a question earlier about that level 4. And so I was wondering if she may be referring to some of the recommendations that AECE has, some of the policy recommendations that AECE does. And sorry, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Nikki DeBlanco. I'm on the board of the Association for Early Childhood Educators. And I was involved in putting those policy recommendations together and those documents. So I just wanted to respond to that in one of the documents on the AECE website is called Quality Educators, Quality Care. And within that is what we used to call our 10-year plan and about advancing and professionalizing the field. And wages and all of that is involved in that. But one of the things that we really recognized and put forward as a change that needed to be made was to honor those of you that are in the field with higher education, like beyond a diploma, because as you know right now, a level 3 is as high as it goes, and that is for a diploma, a diploma. But yet we have so many of you that are in the field that are continuing to take your education, do your degree, go into graduate studies, and explore other opportunities in the field. And so if we continue to make those recommendations to the government and children's services about recognizing those extra levels, and so that there would be like wages and like that would reflect wage enhancements if it needs to be like that, then that would reflect your contribution to the field. So anyways, I just wanted to also say thank you. If you are somebody that has gone over and above what the certain the certification levels that recognize right now, and you are not in that, just thank you for continuing to stay in this field and to continue to further your education. And we hope that someday those of us with higher education levels will be recognized for the work that we do.
Thanks, Nikki. We appreciate you being here.
Okay. I have Catherine Sutherland. You've been unmuted.
Yep. I just had a quick question. How does the wage grid help for profit centers?
I do not have an answer for that. I apologize. My analysis was more based on the worker level. I wouldn't be able to speak for for-profit and how that would change dynamics.
So, but for the wage grid, if you're going to put that in, then it's up to the employers would have to follow that wage grid. So how are you going to make those daycares that are barely surviving on paying, well, a lot of centers are not paying what that Alberta money is saying they're paying, because that's, I don't know who's paying that much money, but not the little centers. So I just don't understand if you're going to have a wage grid like BC is trying to say they're going to get $30 an hour for their level 3s.
Some of this, and I think that's where some of this policy stuff that Nikki was talking about and the roadmap that Miranda mentioned is that none of these things happen in isolation. And that's sort of some of the tension that's happening right now with this money that's come from the federal government and this talk about a Canada-wide system, is that a wage grid by itself probably isn't enough to support a change in the system and to really support wages and retention in the field. It takes a variety of different things happening. So what the government is calling the affordability grant, and then so it requires a change in the way we fund and think about early learning and childcare, some changes in the wages and the expectations and the way that this money rolls through and sort of the expectations for how it's managed. So that's really a bigger question, that the wage grid doesn't live in isolation and just get plunked on everybody. In a perfect world, it would be part of a whole system change in terms of how we're funding and managing and really thinking about early learning and childcare in our province. And that's some of the opportunity that we have with this partnership with the federal government, but also some of the challenge is really thinking through what that system could be and what the roadmap is to get through to some of those steps so that it is something that's sustainable. And those stories about educators who think maybe, okay, I want to go into this field, but it doesn't have anything for me, so that we really build all the supports needed around that so that people believe that this is a valuable place to go and a place they can stay for their career and continue to grow in.
Okay.
I think putting that comment is very valuable in the questions box, just so we have.
I can't open the question box. I don't know where it is on my computer, but it's not opening.
No. Okay.
So I've tried everything.
Okay, we'll just make note of it.
Okay.
And we appreciate too that Miranda's perspective that she's bringing is solely that from the research that they've done together, in terms of through the lens of the childcare worker. So yes, we'll make note of your comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are so many great comments in here. If we could just start from the top and go all the way down, but we appreciate that everything is being recorded on the back end of things. So thank you.
Let me see here. We got Sonia Sharma. You've been unmuted. So.
Hi, thank you for unmuting me. And your suggestions with your questions you ask are really great. I appreciate. And my suggestion would be, like, as I said, that the pension plan also, like the experience, like in other organizations, it happens like when somebody is working for 4 or 5 years, their promotion is due and they get promoted to the level, right? Education is important. So if instead of doing all the credits and go to the next level, if somebody is working for 5 years and then just giving 1 or 2 exams, they can go to the level 2. That helps in employee retention, because they have their mind that, okay, after 1 year, I will be level 2. So my wage top up, everything will be going to increase. So that somehow help. And also, like as everybody saying, we are top on the level 3. So after level 3, the people who are level 3, there is not much growth left for them. So if something introduced like that way, so that level 3 can also get growth, so that the sector can be like more productive, like other sector like banking and everything, they have things planned until retirement. So they are getting growth. So in this sector, we stuck on level 3. So that's something we can add on, and which can help the wage grid, because this more money is coming, so people will be sticking more with.
I like the
Thank you.
positivity.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Those are excellent considerations as we all think about what this could look like and what's needed.
Especially level 1, where I was working with when daycares, in same room we have one level 1 and one level 3 or level 2. So level 1 is working same like level 3, but when it's come to money, it is treated like 4th grade employees. and that's like seen into the attitude also. Like,
Mhm.
you know, when level 1 and level 3, that gets seen in the attitude as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank
I
you
think
so
we're
much.
gonna
Thank
take-
you for listening.
I think we're going to take about 2 more comments, questions, or queries you want to pose. 2 more hands, I guess. And then, unless Leah, you can see something that you want to comment on right away in the chat box. And then we'll say our thank yous to Miranda. And then also note that the recording will also be posted for you to review.
There is a comment from Ashton. Again, apologies if I mispronounce. Bjornsson. Is there anything we can do as individuals to make these changes start to happen and have our voices heard?
I love that question.
Yeah.
Miranda, from your perspective, what do you think?
I think from like I guess just a general advocacy perspective, I'm always a big fan of like calling your member of the legislative house. I know that's probably not the most ideal right now, but I think maybe from, I guess, the individual perspective, childcare is, despite that they have their whole other stuff going on, they do have to make decisions still. And so just, I guess, individual pressure through your members of legislative house, but I'm not entirely sure. I think it's more pressuring policymakers at this point, and some more like big A advocacy has to be done. So that might not be my area to comment, but I'm sure both of you have lots of comments on that.
Absolutely. And I know part of it is being a member of ACE, you know, supporting the work that we do, knowing that we meet with the minister quite frequently on a regular basis. And as some people said, it's a very good initiative by ACE. So thank you, Sonia. If anybody else has a great answer to that question, that would be fantastic to share. Yeah, it would be nice to use your PD funding for membership. I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly as Nikki said, the more members we have, the stronger our voice is.
And I think in thinking about that big A advocacy, so groups getting out there, that's a big piece of ACE's role, is bringing some of this information forward and asking questions. So, you know, becoming a member, asking how you can get involved. I think those things are important. And like Miranda said, it might seem kind of old fashioned, but writing letters to your MLA, writing letters or phoning, writing emails to let them know that people are talking about this, that this is something that's really important to people in all places in the province. So I think that that's a really important piece of things that we can do, is just to keep it top of mind for government.
And I think even attending these AC Connects helps, right? And voicing your opinion or your I mean, respectfully voicing your inquiries or comments on this chat really help us. Because like I said, we do save them, we do look back on them, we do forward them to the facilitators. So participation is a big one from my perspective. Someone had said vote. Make sure you vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's really it right now.
I'm just gonna let Sonia know I got her notice and I will reach out to her.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And Miranda, especially, thank you so much for sharing this information, for bringing these questions for us to think about. Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you about focus groups, and hopefully we can put that information out to anyone. That might be another good place to get your voice heard, is in a focus group. So sign up. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely evening. And you'll hear from us again, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so
Have a
much for
great
having me. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Good night.
Good night.